Welcome back to Silent Sales Machine Radio. We are your co-hosts. I'm Brian.
And I'm Robin Joy.
And this is Coach's Corner.
Hi, everybody. We're going to do something a little bit different today.
Special episode for you. We're going to share a little bit of our backstory about how we had to struggle through, right? When failure's not an option, when life happens. I mean, we're always struggled. We're always challenged with things that we have to overcome doing any kind of business. We're going to share our experience with the Amazon business.
And we hope it'll be encouraging for you and it'll help you see that you're not alone and we believe in you and that you can do this if you want to.
Yep.
Let's get into it.
We're pulling for you.
Yeah, we are. Houston, we have a problem. Those were the words transmitted by Jack Swigert, April 13th, 1970. These were famously transmitted from space because there were 3 men out there in space that were slotted to land on the moon for just the 3rd time in history when somebody had done that. It was the Apollo 13 mission, but that mission was interrupted by an explosion. Can you imagine? You're flying around in this tin can in space like nobody virtually has ever been there before, and there's an explosion. This cannot be good for anybody, right? One moment you're coasting through the vast, serene expanse of space, and the next minute you're faced with a crisis that could end not only your mission, but your lives. And that would be in cold, dark silence. Yeah, sometimes things don't go as they're planned. And sometimes we have no way of planning for what's going to happen. Obviously, the moon's no longer a destination. Their Odyssey, the command module, was crippled. And the Lunar Module, they were going to have to try to use it for a lifeboat to get themselves back home. But there wasn't enough energy to power the essentials, let alone navigate. So they were going to try to navigate manually. But then they looked out, they realized that they couldn't even see the stars because of all the debris from the explosion. This was not going to be easy. So, back on Earth, they gathered all the brainiacs they could find. They tried to get them to figure out how they could use this lunar module, the Aquarius, as a lifeboat. But the Aquarius was never intended to be used in this way. It was designed for 2 men, not 3. And it was designed for 2 days, not 4 or more days. They had to solve problems, and they had to think fast and get it done. They had to solve problems one at a time, too. They couldn't worry about the heat shields holding up when they're getting to re-entry if they ran out of clean air before even getting there. There was a problem. The carbon dioxide scrubber was not going to be able to clean enough air for 3 people and get them all the way back. But they just had to stay alive right now. These guys on Earth, they had to think smart and they had to think fast. They had to think outside the box, like outside the box, right? But think outside the box they did, and they found some clever ways to fix these problems. You see, they had to use whatever the astronauts had with them. They couldn't ship them parts or anything like that, so they had to get kind of creative. In fact, in one case, they used duct tape and spare socks, right? Wow. Your life depends on a piece of adhesive and the socks you haven't even washed yet, right? They solved the carbon dioxide problem with cardboard, plastic bags, and I'm sure sheer will. But MacGyver had nothing on these guys, right? Every time they had a problem, though, it felt like they were squirting a squirt gun at a bonfire. They'd solved the breathing problem just in time to address the starvation and dehydration problem. But step by step, they clawed their way back from the brink of disaster over and over and over until re-entry loomed as the ultimate test. Was all this going to be worth it? The world held its breath during the communication blackout. It seemed like forever when finally the voice of Jim Lovell came on to announce their safe return. Whew. Yeah, this was a triumph of human ingenuity and unyielding spirit. It was a testament to the fact that they really believed the failure was not an option. In fact, they interviewed Gene Kranz, the flight director, back in the 90s when they were making that movie, Apollo 13. They said, wasn't there kind of some panic going on? I mean, they had like nothing to work with, and they held 3 men's lives in their hands. Weren't people kind of freaking out?
Yeah.
Well, here's what he answered. He said, no. He said, when bad things happened, everyone laid out options, and failure was not one of them. So let's talk about an exercise that you can do to help you lock in this failure's not an option attitude. If this is what you want, if you want to do whatever it takes, make sure failure's not an option. Let's figure out what we're dealing with here. I want you to take out a piece of paper, and I want you to write down your goals. Now, I don't want you to just write dollar amounts, $1 million. We all want $1 million, $10 million, whatever. Not dollar amounts. Write down what the dollars are going to do for you. Car payment, mortgage payment. You got a child, a grandchild you need to send to college, pay for somebody's wedding. You need to take care of a loved one.
All these things really go back to like safety and security and love. And it's, the dollars sound good, but then we strip that down a little bit and talk about what are the dollars going to do. The dollars could cover things like mortgage payments and tuition and stuff like that. But what does that really get you? It gets you security. It gets you peace. If you peel all those layers back of the onion, that's really what we're getting to, something that is motivational from a health, wealth, or relationship standpoint.
Right. I agree. All right. So think about that a little bit. Put some real thought into that. And when you finish with that, turn the paper over. On the back, I want you to write, okay, I know what I want. What's it going to take to get what I want? What I wrote down on the other side of the paper. What are my goals? What's it going to take to get that? In terms of time, money, efforts, what's it going to take, right?
And then once you have all that stuff in there, decide whether you are willing to do these things. If you're willing to do those things to help meet your goals, your aspirations, great. Let's keep going on this. And if you think the price is too high, that's okay too. You need to find something that you can get behind and say, yes, I am willing to do this.
Yep. We kind of make a pledge to ourselves, but don't sign it yet. Let's put some more force behind it and kind of think about what it's going to take in a different way, a couple of different ways. You see, we understand that Amazon's not, or any other venture for that matter, is not going to fling you into space. But your business can test your mettle. Sometimes it feels like you don't have the answers. And just like the Apollo team, sometimes we have to solve problems one at a time. And it's not unusual to have to improvise and use the resources that you have at hand. Now I want to tell you what I saw in Brian when he started his Amazon business. I saw a man with the spirit of those astronauts. You see, making these promises to yourself shouldn't be just words. But be prepared. If you make these promises, it'll likely be put to the test.
Definitely it'll be put to the test.
Yeah. Let me tell you how I saw Brian go through this. He began his Amazon business without me, which most of you know, because I had some other things that I was committed to at the time and I couldn't join him. But I was supportive and I wanted him to do well. And he was determined. He didn't let that stop him. He was committed in a way that maybe this story will help you understand the kind of commitment he had. There was an old story about an aging farmer who's getting ready to hand down his son this farm that he'd been working. But it wasn't just any farm. This was a legacy of generations. And he wanted to make sure his son understood the gravity of this situation and was really ready to take this on. So they sat down at breakfast together, and the old man said, "Son, do you understand what commitment is?" And his son said, "Yeah."
I think so.
Yeah. So his dad said, "Yeah, well, look at the plate of ham and eggs in front of you there." He said, "The chicken is involved, but the pig was committed," right?
One of my favorite stories.
Well, that's the kind of commitment that Brian had. He didn't just dip his toes in and say, "Oh, well, no." He said, "I'm going to do this. I'm going to do whatever it takes, and I'm going to make it happen. I've decided." So we sold our home, we moved, we did everything we could to help eliminate distractions so that he could put in a period of intense, focused effort, right? He was going to give himself the best chance that he could. He got a coach from the Jim Cockrum coaching program. He bought a couple of tools, and he came home from work every night after work. He went into his office and spent 2 or 3 hours every single night. Now, he'd come out of there sometimes. He'd come out of there after his session, and he looked like somebody stole his lunch money. I'm telling you. Well, I knew he was looking for something. I didn't really quite understand what it was he was looking for, but I'd ask him, did you find anything? And he'd say, no. And this went on for a while. No, he didn't find anything. And I felt so bad for him. I was like, I don't want you to think that I expect you to keep doing something that's not going to work. I understand the value of commitment for you, but let yourself off the hook. Like, I'm not going to be upset, even though, there've been money and changes made. I'm not going to be upset. I understand. It's okay. I wanted to let him off the hook. But every time he would say the same thing to me. He would say, no, you don't understand. Yes, I'm frustrated. Yes, I'm struggling. But I expected that. And I'm not going to quit. I really respected that. So failure's not an option for you. And you can relate to this kind of feeling. I want you to write down below where you said what it's going to take to meet your goals. I want you to write, failure's not an option. But remember, when you make these kinds of pledges, you're likely to be tested. So be ready. Be like Brian. How often do you say that? Expect challenges, but meet them head on with determination and unshakable belief. Because sometimes the sweetest victories come from the hardest fought battles. So write down failure's not an option, and let's keep going.
But don't sign it yet. Okay, I want to tell you another quick story here about why I don't want you to sign it, because we're going to make an even bigger commitment here in a minute. But first, let me ask you a question. Have you ever dramatically underestimated the gravity of a situation? Well, I have, and it almost cost me my wife. I remember driving a few blocks to the hospital and dropping Robin Joy at the front doors to walk herself into the emergency room. And then after I parked the car and I walked into the waiting room area, I saw Robin going through the check-in process with somebody. And then after a minute or so of some questions and answers, another medical professional comes over and starts taking Robin's vitals. And then whoosh, in a flash, they had whisked her away into this room in the emergency room where there were like at least a half a dozen doctors and nurses in there working on her in a very compelling manner. And to think that I had allowed us to take our sweet old time in making the decision to get to the ER in the first place. And then I let Robin Joy walk herself into the ER as I parked the car. I mean, what was I thinking? So to play back the situation, it went something like this. It was about 4:30 in the morning when Robin Joy woke me up to tell me that she wasn't feeling quite right. And I'm like half asleep. Okay, and she's not communicating all that well. So we decided to sit down for a cup of coffee and do a quick evaluation. Like you do. So within a few minutes of getting out of bed, I could tell that something wasn't quite right. And so we got in the car and we drove 2 blocks. 2 blocks is all it was, thankfully, to the emergency room. And then, as I mentioned, we quickly found ourselves in the midst of a medical emergency, surrounded by over a half a dozen people hooking up monitoring devices, administering tests, injecting medications, scheduling various scans, and then eventually delivering the news that Robin Joy was bleeding in her brain. And they called it a hemorrhagic stroke. Well, by this time, Robin Joy had lost the use of her left side, most of it anyway. And her ability to communicate was also deteriorating even more than when I first got up at 4:30. So when that diagnosis was communicated to us, we were both petrified. I mean, I could only imagine how Robin Joy was feeling with all the commotion going on around her, and I was absolutely beside myself. Because my experience with stroke victims was limited, but not good, grim, as they say. My grandfather suffered a stroke when I was a teenager, and he survived just a couple of weeks after it happened. And my aunt, his daughter, suffered a stroke a few years later and passed immediately as a result. And for those that I knew that had survived a stroke, well, their lives were permanently altered in dramatic ways. When I was in high school, I had a job at a nursing home, and I saw so many stroke victims in there. It's very, very disheartening. So I was preparing for the worst, and I was so disappointed in myself for not seeing the signs and acting quicker. I mean, I could be the reason that Robin Joy experienced the worst outcome. Like, if I had just gotten up and called 911 right away, or instead of taking the time to gather myself, what if we'd immediately gone to the ER? Or what if I'd even seen the signs leading up to the event? Because now they're pretty clear. Maybe I could have prevented it. But this could be happening to her, could it? I mean, it can be happening to us, right? We were still young. Robin Joy's 53 and I was 50. And this is not how things were supposed to happen. This is not what we had drawn up. In fact, one of the reasons that we were on the journey that we were on and that we're still on today is because of what happened to my mother when she was 50 and died unexpectedly. So my parents, it's a sad story, waited until my dad was retired to start the best part of their lives. You know, that part when all us kids were finally gone. They could start using, the money, all the money they were spending on food and clothes and car insurance and all that on themselves to start having some experiences that they really wanted to have in their life. And they only were able to do that for about 4 months because my mother died at the quite young age of 50. Now, and I was in my early 30s at the time. But when that happened, I made a promise to myself and to Robin Joy that we were not going to wait to enjoy life. Like, we had to start immediately doing the things that we wanted to do and having the experiences that we wanted to have. Because the lesson there was that tomorrow is not promised. Today may be all that we have, and we were going to wait no more. So that year, we spent valuable time with friends and family. We went on a dream vacation, and we started being open to more possibilities in life. And over the next decade or so, we would go on to build a new home, start a new business, get new jobs, get promotions. We even moved to a different part of the country. We were really going outside of our comfort zone because I was a homebody. Living in new places, learning new things, making new friends, starting new businesses with varying degrees of success. But the most important part of what we were doing was being together and doing it. So going all the way back to when we first met, I was in a multi-level marketing venture that lasted for a couple of years. And then we tried our hand at trading stocks and options, learned a ton, didn't make any money. For a while, we sold luxury goods on eBay. It was okay. I think Robin liked it better when we had personal use of these luxury products.
Non-sale is a good thing.
We had a great year making like 50 grand in net profit using Google AdSense. And then that evolved into us designing, building, and hosting websites. And we also flipped real estate for a few years, including building a spec home, which was a ton of fun, before the Great Recession of 2007, 2008 caught up with us. And we were overextended and undercapitalized. And it was ugly. So after getting caught up in a bad way with the real estate stuff, I was scarred, my whole body was scarred. And to say I was reticent would be a dramatic understatement. I was like, there was nothing new I was interested in doing. Like, that if I look back at my life, historically, whenever I get burned on something, I don't do it again. And so it took about a decade before I was willing to try something new. And it came as a result of this MST community.
My silent team?
Well, back then I was in the midst of climbing the corporate ladder again when I found myself with this 1.5-hour, 2-hour round trip commute for work. And this was before COVID. So I was expected to be in the office 5 days a week, sometimes 6. There were lots of late nights. It was, But on the plus side, I thought, I had gotten a new car and I had 2 hours a day to listen to whatever music I wanted at whatever volume I wanted.
I'm
right?
glad I wasn't there.
But after a few weeks, the tunes get old, right? There's only so much talk radio that I can take, especially when the Broncos aren't winning Super Bowls. And then I found myself digging into business and leadership content. I mean, rich stuff. This is good stuff. And then entrepreneurial podcasts. And eventually I found my way to shows that were talking about selling goods and services online. Now, in one of those podcasts, the host mentioned that he learned a ton from this guy named Jim Cockrum. Now, I barely knew who the first guy was, the show I was listening to. I had no clue who Jim Cockrum was. But I Googled his name and I found his podcast and I started listening. And what I was hearing on Jim's podcast was so dramatically different than what I've been hearing on these other podcasts about how to use the internet to create money online. And most of the other shows were all like flashy, glitzy, glamorous in terms of how amazing it is to make millions of dollars a year online and how many Lamborghinis or G-Wagons or both can I fit in my driveway, right? And how many pictures in front of chartered jets can I post to my Instagram feed? Jim has guests on his show that are like my next door neighbor, right? He didn't come off as a guru and neither did his guests. In fact, I remember vividly this very specific time when I had this aha moment. It was early in the morning in the dead of winter. It was still dark outside because it was winter. And I'm on the highway making this, what would be normally a 45 to 60 minute commute to the office, which was probably like an hour and a half that day because it was snowing outside. Because we live in Colorado. This is what happens in the middle of winter. So, second question for you. Have you ever found yourself like reaching outside the driver's side window to grab the windshield wiper as it's going by so that you can snap it against the windshield to knock the ice off? I mean, my hands are not at 10 and 2, but at least I could continue to see out the front windshield to see the taillights in front of me, right? Well, this was the kind of morning that it was. And I'm listening to one of Jim's guests share her story about how she built her Amazon business from zero knowledge of the internet or how to use it to make money to like $20,000 or $30,000 a month in sales, $5,000 or $6,000 a month in profit. And this person, many of you may remember her name, Carolyn, was homeless just a year or so prior. And it was super inspirational for me. That one episode hooked me. And I started listening daily to hear about the latest success stories that were coming out of this community. Because I was fired up. Like every day I was like refreshing the app. Is there a new one? Is there a new one? And on days where there weren't new episodes, then I'd scroll back and listen to earlier episodes. And do you know what it was that really cemented it for me? And keep in mind, right, the size of scar that I have on me at this time from the Great Recession. I mean, I was not in the market for a new entrepreneurial adventure. But I just had this moment where I realized that the success stories were coming from normal, everyday people. And I thought, wait a second, I'm a normal, everyday people.
Well,
there could be those who would argue that.
Maybe.
So then I asked myself, like, what do all of these hundreds of people that I was listening to share their success stories with the public? What do they have in common? Mm-hmm. Because I had heard the real life success story of Carolyn, who was a single mother of 3. She was homeless. And thanks to her Amazon business, was able to buy a home for herself and her children. Mm-hmm. And I'd also heard from married couples like Rob and Joy and I who wanted to build something together. Mm-hmm. Grandparents who wanted to teach their grandkids how to make money online. And that's what we're doing now. Mm-hmm. A youth pastor, I can't remember his name, who had tried all these different ways of selling things online and they all failed. But when he started studying the strategies from the Proven Amazon course, he turned $400 into full-time income. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of other examples that if you hang around this community long enough, you will hear. But I couldn't find anything that they all had in common other than the Proven Amazon course. So long story short, I was convinced. And I joined the community, launched my first Amazon store a couple of months later, and then life happened. And it seemed like the previous 25 years of our lives together was flashing by at warp speed. I mean, our entire world was hanging in the balance. The medical staff was in and out, checking this and that, injecting this or that, testing this and that. Like, I don't even know really how much time passed. It seemed like forever and just mere seconds at the same time. Fortunately, the team got Rob and Joy back to a stable state. and her blood pressure came down to acceptable levels. Because like when the reason we got whisked away into this room so quickly after we got into the ER was because her blood pressure was like 270 over 190 or something like that, like some ridiculous number, right? Now, Robin Joy never lost consciousness, and I cannot imagine how it must have felt to be fully aware of your life being up for grabs. But Robin Joy always takes life by the horns, and this situation was no different. She grabbed life by the horns, and after a 3-day stay in the ICU, which came with its own other set of challenges, we were on our way home. The long 2-block trek back home.
Yeah.
And while it was a relief to have Robin Joy back home and stable, the next 3 months were agonizing because what had caused Robin Joy's hemorrhagic stroke was a lack of oxygen to her brain. So while in the hospital, she was loosely diagnosed with sleep apnea. But we couldn't get the actual diagnosis until she completed like this authorized sleep study. So what sleep apnea does, if you're unaware, is it prevents efficient oxygen flow throughout the body because the body actually stops breathing. So the process that we have to bring oxygen and oxygenate our blood is not happening. And in Robin Joy's case, it was quite severe. And her brain's cry for help was to start bleeding. So over the next 3 months, we struggled. Insurance issues, scheduling appointments, 3, 4, 5, 6 different doctors, and what we call the 5 o'clock cries. Robin's the one who actually gave it the label. I did not. But this is when I would get home from work and Robin Joy would tell me like all her struggles throughout the day about, trying to get appointments scheduled, trying to get insurance accepted, getting the runaround, getting passed around, and ultimately failing to get this sleep study scheduled. And the sleep study was a crucial part of it was our crucial next step. See, we needed to complete the sleep study in order to get the official diagnosis of sleep apnea so that we could get the machine, the CPAP machine, to mitigate the risk of another stroke. Because the time you're most at risk for having a stroke is right after you just had one. So as Robin Joy is telling me about the frustration and the exasperation of her day, it was building, and soon she was bawling her eyes out, and I was doing everything I could to comfort her. There were times I'd find myself standing over her in the middle of the night just to make sure that she was still breathing, because they'd sent her home with this oxygen, thing that goes in her nose. But it really was of little solace to me, knowing that it may not even make a difference if things went badly. If she stopped breathing, it doesn't really do that much, right? And I had to start kind of blocking out these visions that were being dumped into my head, right? That can paint an ugly picture. And I knew that we had to stay positive. And honestly, that was fairly easy for us to do given our beliefs and our actions up to that point. But there were times that it took concerted effort. And I remember feeling helpless and at the mercy of the insurance company and this scheduling availability to get to the next step in the process. I remember thinking, gosh, I wish we just had like $50,000 in the bank so we could just say, you know what? Screw the insurance company. We're just going to pay cash. But things were tighter than that, because I'd started this Amazon business because I was motivated to rebuild the capital and cash reserves that we've been using on our various entrepreneurial ventures up to that point. And they sent us the take it at home test, but the results were so far off the scale, they didn't believe it. So they weren't going to do anything without getting Robin into an actual in-person sleep study. So for the first couple of months after I started this business, I'd wandered around. I was trying to do just about every strategy that was in the Proven Amazon course at the time, from what's now called replens, to bundling, to private label from China, to private label the easy way, to KDP, to wholesale. And they are all absolutely viable Amazon strategies. But I wasn't spending enough time in any one of them to really build any skills. So I would come home from work every night and spend like 2.5 hours in the office, like Robin said, after the 5 o'clock cries.
Yes.
4 nights a week, and then another 4 to 6 hours on the weekend, trying to make progress and really coming up empty. We were selling stuff. I was doing like $2,000 or $3,000 a month in revenue, but just didn't get it. It wasn't clicking for me. And I used to walk out of the office at night, and Robin Joy would be studying or knitting or something. And she would give me those questioning eyes like, well, did you find something tonight? And I was like, nah. I shake my head no. And I felt embarrassed that I had convinced Robin Joy that I could figure this out. And here I was every night coming out empty-handed, nearly every night. But I was resolute. And I do remember coming into this Amazon business with the failure is not an option attitude. I was going to be an Amazon business owner. I mean, I felt like I had screwed around long enough, right? It was time to get my poop in a group and make some real progress. I mean, we could live the perfectly acceptable, everyone expects us and wouldn't think any less of us kind of life, right? We were weighed down, though, with our dream home and 2 cars, careers, responsibilities, furnace and roof replacements, colonoscopies, insurance companies, right? And all the debt that goes along with those things. And I remember at that time looking ahead and seeing that we were going to be very tight on time to be able to get the nest egg that we thought we needed for retirement. And there I was, still not figuring it out. When I'm squeezing Robin's hand as we're talking to a doctor in the ICU about what her future looks like. And some of you would probably think, man, Brian, you better put that business on hold now because something could happen at any moment. And I'm not sure you'd be wrong, and I don't know that I could blame you. But all I could think was, Brian, you better get this business built now because something could happen at any moment. So after we got home, July 4th, 2019, I buckled down. The next 60 days, I added around 60 ASINs to my list from one store, Target. It was the only place I shopped at the time. And then went to the Proven Conference, had an amazing experience. I was fired up. I remember calling Robin every night, like, you're not going to believe this.
You got me fired up.
And Robin got fired up too. So when I got home in October of that year, we had our first 5-figure month. And Robin Joy became my first coaching student. And she built our list to over 300 ASINs over the next 8 weeks. And we ended up finishing that year around $250,000 in total sales. Within 6 months after I got back from the Proven Conference, we were selling over $50,000 a month. And we finished that year just shy of $700,000. That year, we also hired our first subcontractor who was shopping and shipping for us out of a different part of the country. I started officially coaching in the Amazon business for Jim Cockrum about 18 months after I started the first Amazon store. And then Robin Joy and I teamed up for coaching about a year after that. Today, we run a modest 6-figure Amazon business. We've created multiple courses in the Proven Amazon course, and we host a weekly podcast. These things didn't happen, though, because they were easy.
No.
We have been challenged every step of the way.
Yes.
So I want you to go back to that piece of paper. Right after you wrote down failure is not an option. And I want you to write underneath that, even when life happens. And then if you're still decided that this is what you're going to do, then I want you to sign it.
Yeah.
If you've gone through all these steps, written down your aspirations, decided that you're willing to do what it's going to take to make that happen, you've decided that you're committed with a failure is not an option, and even when life happens attitude, we know you can do it.
Yeah. We're rooting for you. Yeah.
We are inspired by the accomplishments of others.
Yes. We're passionate about helping others reach their goals. And we're committed to sharing the keys to success that have been shared with us.
We're rooting for you.
You can do it. See you soon.
Hey, before I let you go, we've got a special segment that we do once a week or so around here with my good friend, Mr. Jeff Schick of jeffschick.com, just like the razor, spelled just like the razor. He's our Amazon legal and policy expert, and he's always got an interesting topic that he can throw at us. What do you got for us today, Jeff?
Well, I have an interesting one for sure. It is how much do you trust account health support agents? And so a lot of times sellers will come to me and they'll say, well, hey, I talked to so-and-so at Account Health and they walked me through this scenario. and must be good, right? And the answer is sometimes, but not always. So have two cases actually that are interesting recently that come to mind that demonstrate the dangers of just blindly following the account health associates, their recommendations. One of them was a couple weeks ago, and it was a case where a seller received 5 IP claims. Now, this is a seller I've worked with for 3 years, and unfortunately, he didn't call me first. I don't know why, but he learned from it. He called account health, and they said, "Oh, yeah, just acknowledge all of them, and you'll be fine. They'll get them off the dashboard." So he went ahead and he acknowledged them, and they accepted like 2 of them, but 3 of them they said, "No, sorry, we can't accept this." Then he got 3 more IP claims. So he went from 5 minus 2 equals 3 plus 3, so a total of 6. But those 6 caused his account rating to fall to a 97. Now, if you've heard me jabber about the account health rating before, you'll know that anything below 99 means that your account will be deactivated in 72 hours. So he was given a 72-hour notice saying his account will be deactivated in 72 hours if he doesn't fix these IP claims. So what does he do? He sends me a frantic text message. I was actually in the hospital emergency room at the time. So I'm trying to respond to this text message while there's an IV hooked up to my arm and they're taking 8 vials of blood. And I'm like, this is great.
No way. That's commitment right there.
I had my laptop and I was like asking the nurse, I'm like, can you pass the laptop? And she was like, how are you going to type with all this IV in your arm? I'm like, I'm right-handed and it's in my left arm. Maybe I can figure this one out. So I pulled out my trusty laptop and I started logging in. And I looked and I asked him, I go, hey, how come all 6 of these say that you acknowledged the violation? And he goes, oh, well, I talked to account health and they said to do it. And I said, okay, but that's not the right answer. He goes, yeah, clearly not, because if you click on all of the acknowledgments, it says we can't accept the acknowledgement because you've acknowledged too many violations. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's new. I've never seen them come back and be like, we can't accept your acknowledgement because you've acknowledged too many in the past. So it forced him into submitting appeals, which of course is what we would have done from the beginning anyways. So knowing that he was an N97, I knew he needed 3 points to get his account, not deactivated within 72 hours. So, quickly scanned the list, found one of them that I knew that we'd worked with the rights owner before. And of course, our process with IP claims is we don't appeal with Amazon. We go to the rights owners and we try to get the rights owners to remove them. And then we go to Amazon if necessary. So I found one of the rights owners that we've worked with before that does remove their claims. And so we reached out to him. We said, hey, need you to take care of this. This is, 4:00 on a Friday. Need you to take care of this immediately, And luckily they replied back, sure, it's been retracted. And so that took him up to like 102 and bought us time to deal with the other 5 that were on there through our proper channels and not acknowledging them. So that's the first example of what can go wrong when people just blindly acknowledge, because if you acknowledge too many violations, then when you really need to be able to acknowledge, you need those 3 points to save your account. They might not let you do it because you've wasted it on other times when his score was above 200, he was acknowledging stuff and he could have been fighting it and not been under the gun. So
he was trusting the account health expert at Amazon instead of calling you guys first. That's what led to this whole mess. It kind of reminds me of calling the IRS helpline here in the United States, the tax helpline, the government helpers. Like, you don't know if you're necessarily going to get accurate advice. Use an accountant instead. Someone who's done taxes a long time. I would trust my accountant over the 1-800 IRS agent any day. Kind of the same thing I'm hearing here.
Exactly. They mean well, but they don't always know what they're talking about, because they're, for instance, at Amazon, there's different levels, right? There's seller support, there's seller performance, there's account health specialists. Those are the subset of seller support. They're not actually the people reviewing cases. Right. So when you have a seller performance representatives, they actually have been on the other, they're the ones on the other side that actually know what's going on with the case and how to handle it and what it needs to say if you're submitting something. Whereas seller support and account health support, they're just doing their best, best efforts.
Right. They could have been hired 2 weeks ago and they're just trying to move on to the next phone call.
Absolutely.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Similarly, I had another case last week. They, same thing. Seller gets a 72-hour notice, calls account health support. Nice enough person on the phone tells them, hey, just submit an appeal. Seller says, okay, great. What do I submit? I didn't do it.
3 words.
He goes, that's what I'm supposed to say. I didn't do it. Yeah, just say that. That's because the way you've explained it, you're good. You didn't do it. And he didn't do it. He really didn't. He was innocent of what they'd accused him of. And so it was just, the computers flagged it incorrectly. So he puts it in. I didn't do it. Submit appeal. And then he calls me. He goes, "Hey, I just don't feel right about that. Like, I just submitted an appeal that said I didn't do it. It doesn't seem right." I'm like, "Yeah, it's not right. It's certainly not right." I said, "So what are they accusing you of?" He tells me the offense that they're accusing him of doing. I said, "Okay. Why do you think they thought that?" "I don't know. I never did it." I said, "Okay, I understand you never did it, but why would they think that?" And so we're talking through, and he goes, "Well, I did this, this, and this," which sort of seems. I'm like, "Well, you see how it could look from the other side that maybe you did do it based on what you're saying, even though now we have the data to prove you did." And he goes, "Yeah, absolutely." I said, "Okay. And we've got all this other evidence that backs up your side of the story too." "Yeah, we do." I said, "Okay, great. So that's what we're going to submit now." And so he goes into the appeal window. It has still not been reviewed by anyone yet. It's pending submission or pending review. So I said, "Okay, we're going to click edit, and we're going to go in and we're going to edit this, and we're going to put this extra information in." So we added those extra bullet points. We added some, supporting documents. And a couple hours later, he received an email saying, "We've reviewed your appeal, and you may continue to sell on Amazon. You're no longer at risk of suspension."
That's beautiful.
I can guarantee if he had just said, "I didn't do it," probably would not have had that same outcome.
That wouldn't have been enough. That would not have been sufficient.
Right. Because even though we both know he didn't do it, he had to prove that he didn't do it because what he did looked like it. And just, optics, there's always two sides to every story, right? So there's his side, Amazon's side, and the truth. And of course, the truth was closer to his side than Amazon's side. And we just had to give them the data so they'd see it too. So
well done. I love stories like that. Great happy ending and save the day. And yeah, you can edit your appeal if they haven't started reviewing it yet. I didn't even realize that. That's great to know. So a lot of little nuggets in there today.
Yeah, they rolled it out recently. It did not used to be the case. It used to be once you submitted it, you were kind of locked in until they declined it. So
that's why I've never seen that. Very cool.
So,
all right, well, good hanging out with you today, Jeff. I appreciate it, man. We're going to do this again next week.
Sounds good.
Let's plan on it. JeffSchick.com, our resident expert for all things Amazon legal and Amazon policy. He's a lawyer. So get a lawyer on your side for just a few bucks a day. Very much worth it if you're taking the Amazon business serious. So we'll talk to you again real soon, Jeff.
Thanks. And I should mention too, he was a new client. So I think he's only paid us 1 month of
oh, that's cool.
Of membership.
1 month of retainer, more than paid for retainer. Yeah,
absolutely. So, and you think about like in the past, with attorneys, that would have been a $2,500 appeal, and that was covered under 1 month's retainer fee. So,
absolutely, we covered that in some of the newer episodes, the first episodes we did with you. Just the fact of anything like this in the past would have cost you $1,500 to $3,000 minimum just to get the attention of someone who would help you with these kind of scenarios. So, for a few dollars a day, that's a steal, man. Awesome. Correct. All right, we'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good. Thanks,
buddy. Bye then.
Bye.